The storm raged in the sky, lightning flashing and thunder booming as the plane bucked like a toy. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds' face was drenched in sweat, his eyes flicking from the gauges to the storm above. "We can't keep going," he murmured, while First Officer Harris's heart raced. Then a chilling thought echoed in their minds. The landing gear isn't working. Fuel was running low. The storm was intensifying, and the situation was getting worse. Captain Reynolds spoke into the radio. "Control, this is Flight 456. Systems are down, fuel's low, and the landing gear isn't responding. We need an emergency landing now." A crackling voice came through. "Flight 456, runway is clear. Proceed with caution." The two pilots exchanged a glance. This moment would change everything. It was do or die. The early morning sky was clear, the kind of day that promised smooth travel and calm skies. At the airport, Flight 456 stood poised at the terminal, the sun rising in the distance. Passengers made their way through the gates, filing into the aircraft with a quiet sense of routine. The doors closed behind them with a soft thud, and the cabin crew moved swiftly, preparing for departure. Outside, the plane's engines hummed with quiet power, ready to take to the skies. As the last few passengers took their seats, Captain Reynolds gave a final check of the control panel. With over 20 years of experience, he had seen it all. Beside him, First Officer Harris ran through the final procedures, both pilots exchanging a few words, their voices calm and controlled. The atmosphere in the cockpit was one of focus, the quiet hum of the engines below blending with the steady beeping of the instruments. Everything seemed perfectly normal. With a smooth push of the throttle, the plane began to roll down the runway. The acceleration was smooth, the sound of the engines rising just slightly as the plane gained speed. Outside the windows, the landscape blurred as the plane lifted off, leaving the airport behind. The passengers settled in, some looking out at the vast expanse of blue sky, others lost in the quiet comfort of their seats. The flight was proceeding exactly as planned, on time, uneventful, and calm. Up in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds maintained a steady hand on the controls, his eyes scanning the instruments with practiced ease. The weather was clear, the skies without a cloud in sight, a perfect day for flying. First Officer Harris adjusted his headset, checking in with air traffic control as the plane climbed higher. They exchanged the usual formalities, and all seemed well. But as the plane reached its cruising altitude, something subtle, something unexplainable, shifted. There was an odd vibration that ran through the cabin, a brief, subtle jolt that went unnoticed by most of the passengers. But in the cockpit, both pilots felt it. A momentary unease, a sensation that something wasn't quite right. Captain Reynolds glanced at the radar, searching for any sign of turbulence or storm clouds. But the screen was clear, as expected. The flight continued smoothly, as it should. Yet the unease lingered, like a small crack in a perfect surface, growing quietly beneath the calm exterior. The hum of the engines filled the cockpit, steady and constant. Then, without warning, a soft flicker ran across the control panel, followed by another. It was barely noticeable, but enough to pull both pilots' attention. They exchanged a quick look, but there was no need for panic. It could be anything. Perhaps an electrical glitch, a minor disturbance. They had dealt with such things before. However, as the seconds ticked by, the flickering intensified. Harris adjusted the frequency on the radio, trying to reach air traffic control again. But there was a slight crackling in the static, as though the very air around them had changed. The engine's hum seemed to grow louder, a low rumble that didn't quite feel right. Out in the cabin, most passengers remained unaware of the shift in atmosphere. A mother rocked her child to sleep, the steady motion of the flight lulling them into a false sense of safety. A businessman flipped through his papers, his thoughts consumed by the day's agenda. Near the back, a young couple whispered to each other, oblivious to the growing tension in the cockpit. Suddenly, the plane shuddered once again, this time more forcefully. It was brief, but intense enough to make the passengers glance at one another in confusion. The sensation of unease, now palpable, swept over the cabin like a wave, and for the first time, the normalcy of the flight was shattered. In the cockpit, the pilots exchanged a look, their brows furrowed. The radar showed nothing abnormal, the instruments remained steady, yet a chill crept down their spines. Something was wrong. The initial issue, perhaps a minor malfunction or a small, seemingly inconsequential problem, begins to grow in intensity. What was initially a minor flicker or odd vibration now becomes something more persistent. The cockpit instruments flicker again, this time accompanied by an unsettling sound. The pilots exchange uneasy glances, but neither speaks aloud at first. They try to continue with their duties, brushing off the issue as a routine glitch. But the tension in the air is palpable. Outside, the sky begins to shift. A small patch of cloud slowly grows larger. The weather, previously clear, starts to change, though not drastically. Still, it's enough to keep the pilots on edge. As the issue grows, so do the reactions from the crew. Captain Reynolds, normally calm under pressure, feels a slight tightening in his chest. First Officer Harris, usually the more cautious one, starts questioning the system, becoming more vocal. Their exchange becomes more frantic as the weather begins to worsen, adding to their stress. Internal conflicts begin to emerge. Captain Reynolds, accustomed to being in control, begins to question his own instincts. Harris, normally confident, starts doubting the safety of the flight, leading to a subtle but noticeable shift in their dynamic. In the cabin, passengers are unaware of the looming danger, but subtle signs of discomfort begin to spread. The occasional glance exchanged between the flight attendants, the low murmur of passengers noticing turbulence, all hint at something deeper happening behind the scenes. As the flight progresses, the issues continue to escalate. The initial glitch in the system now leads to more visible problems. The plane's autopilot starts malfunctioning, forcing Captain Reynolds to take manual control. The cabin lights flicker and the temperature fluctuates, adding to the growing sense of unease. Outside, the weather worsens. Clouds darken rapidly, a storm approaching far quicker than expected. The passengers feel a shift in the air, a tangible tension that mirrors the mounting problems in the cockpit. The pilots are faced with a decision: continue to press forward, hoping the issue is nothing more than a technical glitch, or divert and take precautionary measures. The stakes grow higher as turbulence begins to rattle the plane, forcing both pilots to engage in tense communication. A mechanical issue with the landing gear adds further complications. The balance between maintaining control of the flight and avoiding full-blown panic becomes delicate. The tension that has been escalating throughout the flight reaches its unbearable peak. The storm, which began as a distant rumble on the horizon, now engulfs the plane with unrelenting force. The turbulence has escalated beyond control, thrashing the aircraft from side to side like a helpless toy in the hands of an enraged giant. The deafening sound of the winds outside is constant, a violent howling crescendo that seems to vibrate through every inch of the metal frame. Inside the cockpit, the red glow of warning lights casts a sinister hue over the panel, their shrill alarms screaming in protest against the storm's fury. One by one, the instruments are failing, altimeters spinning out of control, speed indicators flashing erratically, the navigation system flickering in and out, struggling to maintain its hold on reality. Each flicker and flash from the dashboard is a relentless reminder of the perilous situation they are in. What began as a manageable storm has morphed into a life-threatening nightmare, with the full wrath of nature now battering the plane. Captain Reynolds, his knuckles white from the tight grip he has on the yoke, scans the instrument panel frantically. His eyes dart from gauge to gauge, desperately searching for any sign of stability. But with each passing second, it becomes painfully clear. Every decision, every move is critical. One more failure, one slip-up, and the consequences will be catastrophic. Outside, the storm is an angry beast. Lightning strikes so close that it feels as though the very sky is shattering, each burst of light illuminating the cockpit with a blinding flash. The thunder that follows is more than mere noise. It's a shockwave, a physical force that shakes the plane to its very core. The wind outside howls like a living creature, battering against the aircraft as if testing every ounce of its structural integrity. Captain Reynolds can feel the strain on the plane, the wings bending, the fuselage groaning, each tremor a reminder that the plane is fighting to stay aloft under the storm's relentless assault. "Captain, we're losing it." First Officer Harris's voice cuts through the static, his words sharp and filled with panic. The urgency in his tone is undeniable. Reynolds, still calm but with his own voice betraying the pressure, responds. "I know, Harris. Hold on tight. We're not done yet." The situation has escalated into a desperate struggle for survival. The plane's fuel is dangerously low. Every second spent in the air is one step closer to running out. The storm shows no mercy, only growing in strength. The landing gear remains a critical problem, its malfunctioning parts a ticking time bomb. The longer they remain airborne, the higher the chances that it will fail when they need it most. Reynolds knows they are playing a deadly game of survival, praying the plane holds together long enough for them to land safely. Yet with every passing moment, the stakes rise higher and higher. The captain's mind is racing. The options seem limited, each more risky than the last. Continuing to fly could mean running out of fuel in the middle of the storm, unable to reach any kind of safe haven. But attempting an emergency landing under these conditions? The thought sends a chill down his spine. The storm is getting worse by the minute, the systems failing faster than they can process, and the risk of a catastrophic failure with the landing gear makes every choice feel impossible. Reynolds steals a glance at the clock. Time is running out. The weight of the decision presses down on him with crushing force. There is no clear, safe path forward. Every option is a gamble, but they can't afford to wait much longer. The storm is closing in faster than they can react. If they don't make a decision now, it might be too late. The aircraft lurches again, a sharp jolt that sends a surge of panic through the crew. The turbulence is relentless, and now it feels as though the storm is trying to tear the plane apart. Reynolds locks eyes with Harris, whose face is as pale as the storm-saturated sky outside. They don't need to speak. The fear is palpable in the air, but so is the resolve. "Harris, we can't keep going like this," Reynolds says through gritted teeth, his voice low but firm. "If we don't act now, we're finished. It's do or die." Harris's breath is shallow, his grip on the seat edge so tight it's as if he's holding on to the last shred of sanity in the chaos. He's struggling to make sense of the failing instruments, but the sheer intensity of the storm is too much. The storm is winning, and they need to make a move. With another violent wave of turbulence, Reynolds steels himself. His heart pounds in his chest, each beat sounding like a countdown to an uncertain future. But there's no choice left. The storm is relentless, the fuel too low, and the systems too compromised. They can't keep flying like this, and they can't keep waiting. The time to act is now. "All right," Reynolds says, his voice thick with the gravity of the moment. "We're going in. Prepare for the landing." Harris doesn't respond with words, but the determination in his eyes is all the answer Reynolds needs. Both men know this is it, the most dangerous moment of their lives. The next few minutes will decide everything. There's no turning back now. Both pilots are visibly exhausted, sweat dripping down their faces as they try to keep the plane steady. Every movement feels like an eternity. Captain Reynolds' hands grip the control yoke tightly, his knuckles white, as he focuses on keeping the plane level, despite the chaotic turbulence. His mind races through all the scenarios. Emergency landing, ditching the plane in the ocean, or pushing forward to reach the nearest runway. None of them come with guarantees. Meanwhile, First Officer Harris fights a battle of his own. Doubt and fear cloud his judgment. The pressure is mounting, and every second feels like a countdown. The fear in his eyes is barely concealed, and his usually steady voice cracks as he tries to communicate with air traffic control. His mind is filled with questions. Are they making the right decision? How many lives are truly at risk here? The stakes couldn't be higher. The passengers, unaware of the full scope of danger, are beginning to panic. Some are praying, others are clutching their loved ones, while the flight attendants scramble to reassure the cabin. But the truth is undeniable. The situation is dire, and time is running out. In the cockpit, the tension is unbearable. The crew has no more options left. There's no going back now. Reynolds calls for an immediate response from air traffic control, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. The only hope is to find an emergency landing location within a narrow window of opportunity. The storm's eye is coming closer, and every second that passes brings them closer to a catastrophic outcome. Every action counts. Harris, now barely holding it together, is forced to make a snap decision. He can see the runway, but it's miles away, and the plane is losing altitude rapidly. The captain makes his move, ordering an emergency descent. The moment is electric with intensity. One wrong move could cost them everything. After the harrowing descent, the plane finally stabilizes. The cockpit, once filled with chaos and tension, is now eerily quiet except for the soft hum of the still functioning systems. The storm outside is no longer a direct threat, though the weather conditions remain turbulent. The pilots exchange a quick, relieved glance. There's no time to fully relax, but they've made it through the immediate danger. The adrenaline that kept them alive through the worst is beginning to fade, and exhaustion starts to take its toll. Captain Reynolds wipes the sweat from his brow, his hands still shaking from the intensity of the situation. He knows they are not out of the woods yet, but the worst seems to have passed. The air traffic control is guiding them to an emergency landing spot, and the pilots have a fleeting moment of respite before they must face the next hurdle. Getting the plane down safely. The toll of the experience hits them all at once. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds takes a deep breath, his mind still racing. Harris, who had been fighting his own internal fears throughout the crisis, now allows himself a brief moment of collapse. His emotions surge: fear, relief, disbelief. The tension that had gripped him throughout the ordeal now gives way to exhaustion, and he slumps in his seat, eyes closing for just a moment. In the cabin, the passengers are still shaken, some in tears, others trying to comfort one another. Flight attendants move through the aisles, offering what little comfort they can as the full scale of what they have just survived begins to sink in. The reality of the situation is starting to settle in. They have narrowly escaped disaster, but there is still much to process. Though the immediate danger is over, the tension in the air has not completely dissipated. The pilots are now focused on landing the plane, and there are still challenges ahead. Harris checks the instruments again, and Reynolds makes sure the plane is on course to reach the emergency runway. Their focus sharpens, but the emotional weight of what they've just endured lingers. In the cabin, the passengers have quieted down, but the fear has not entirely gone away. Some still look to the flight attendants for reassurance, while others keep staring out the windows, unsure if the danger is truly over. A sense of unease still hangs in the air. Captain Reynolds communicates with air traffic control one final time, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the harrowing ordeal they've just survived.
Control, this is Flight 456. We're on final approach for emergency landing. All systems are compromised, requesting immediate clearance to land. Over.
There's a brief pause, the tension palpable, before the response crackles through the static.
Flight 456, we've cleared the runway. You're cleared to land. Maintain course and descent rate. We'll guide you in. Be advised, wind conditions are unstable. Proceed with caution. Understood, Control.
Reynolds responds, his voice barely masking the gravity of their situation. He looks at Harris, who is now focused intently on the instruments, his hands trembling but steady. Harris, you heard that? Stay sharp. This is it. No mistakes. As the communication ends, a heavy silence falls over the cockpit. Reynolds takes a deep breath, his knuckles white on the controls. There's still uncertainty in the air, and the danger isn't truly behind them yet. He knows their survival depends not just on skill, but on sheer luck. The land ahead is within their reach, but he can't shake the feeling that what they've just been through, what they've yet to fully process, may haunt them for much longer than this flight. The survivors of Flight 456, once battered by fear and chaos, now find themselves grounded, not just in the physical sense, but in an emotional reality that's still sinking in. The storm that had raged through the skies is now far behind them. In its wake, a quiet calm settles in, punctuated only by the soft hum of the aircraft as it glides toward the runway. As the plane touches down, the wheels kiss the tarmac with an effortless smoothness. A sound so ordinary, so soothing, it's almost surreal after the tumultuous events that led them here. It's a moment of unexpected peace, the kind you only understand after facing the brink of disaster. Captain Reynolds exhales deeply, his grip on the controls loosening just slightly. The engines, once an urgent roar in the midst of crisis, now emit a gentle, steady hum. The cockpit feels different, quiet, almost like a dream. The sense of danger has evaporated, but the emotional weight remains. "Harris," Reynolds speaks softly, his voice carrying a deep gratitude, yet with the shadow of exhaustion lingering. We did it. We're here." Harris turns to him, his eyes still distant, as if the sheer relief hasn't fully settled. "Yeah," he replies, a weak smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't think we would, but we made it." Outside the window, the world is calm. The storm has passed, the skies have cleared, and the airport stretches out ahead, a symbol of safety after the terrifying unknown. But inside the cockpit, the aftermath of the flight's turbulence lingers. It's not just the physical exhaustion. They are all carrying invisible scars. Flight attendant Jenna, who had been tirelessly helping passengers, stands at the threshold of the cabin, looking out at the crew. Her voice, thick with emotion, trembles slightly. "I don't think I'll ever forget those final moments. How close we were to losing it all." Reynolds watches as the last of the passengers step off the plane, their steps light, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. It should be a moment of pure triumph, but something more profound hangs in the air. The terror, the uncertainty, the weight of it all settles into his bones. He can't help but reflect on every decision, every second that led to this moment. As the plane sits parked on the tarmac, no longer a vessel of terror, but a symbol of survival, the crew disembarks. The weight of the ordeal lingers in the air, but there is a sense of resolution, of quiet peace. The sun breaks through the clouds as the survivors walk toward the terminal. The sky is painted with soft shades of gold and orange, casting a gentle glow over the world that feels so still, so normal, almost too normal after everything they've been through. The storm has passed, but for each of them, the emotional journey is only beginning. The scars of Flight 456 will never fully fade. They've survived the impossible, and while they've made it to safety, the lessons learned will forever shape the people they have become. There's no grand victory, no trophy to claim, only the quiet, shared knowledge that they made it through together. And that's enough. The world moves on, but for them, the memory of Flight 456 will never truly be over. The echoes of that fateful journey will stay with them, always.